Tuesday afternoon, 4 p.m. in Switzerland. It's Space Café WebTalk time. Our Space Café WebTalk, 33 minutes with Jenni Tapio, will begin soon. Thank you for joining us for this very informative and hopefully inspiring event about the implementation of national space laws on the example of Finland and beyond. As always, we really appreciate your participation and your ongoing feedback. I'm Torsten Kriening, your host today and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. We are a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I think many of you already are familiar with our website, bi-weekly newsletters, daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. Check out the current episode number 6 of our podcast named Proudly Human, the ambitious mission of a woman who seeks new knowledge for our civilization on Mars, featuring Dr. Adriana Mare. If you have missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the event section and now on YouTube as well. We host our Space Café web talks on a weekly basis, and it's already the 16th edition. I hope you mark Tuesdays at the same time in your calendars. And 16th edition in a weekly sequence means for 4 months, or we are doing it during the lockdowns. Today, I'm very honored to be joined by a wonderful and very special guest from the North, Jenni Tapio. Jenni, welcome. Jenni works as a, by the way, you can say something.
Hi.
Yeah, that's fine. Jenni works as a chief specialist at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment in Finland, with a special focus in space law, acting as the head of the Finnish delegation to the legal, the scientific, and the technical subcommittees on the UN Committee of the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. She is also a Finnish delegate to the European Space Agency International Relations and International Industry Policy Committees. Prior to joining the ministry, she was employed for 15 years in the private sector as an attorney at law at Bird & Bird law firms, as an in-house counsel for Airbus Defence and Space and Nokia Corporation. Jenni holds law degrees from the University of Essex and from the University in Helsinki, and she is doing a doctoral candidate in space law at the University of Helsinki right now. Jenni was a member of the working group drafting the Finnish national space law. She has written articles and books chapters, especially focusing on the interaction of international and national laws. She is a member of the board of the European Center for Space Law, ECSL, and a member of the International Institute of Space Law, IISL. Today, she joins us in her vacation, and we are very grateful for that, from Helsinki, and will talk on her own behalf, not representing the government of Finland. I'm very proud to welcome Jenni in my show. So let's start. Thinking about Finland usually doesn't make an immediate connection to space, I would say. We think about the excellent education system leading to first places in the PISA study, an outstanding nature, and bright summer nights. And I mean, maybe elder people like me think about a Nokia 3310 mobile phone. Space come in very late. Jenni, can you please give us an intro into the Finnish space story?
Certainly, and thank you for that introduction, and a lot thanks for inviting me to a Space Cafe, two of my favorite things, space and coffee coming together. And you are quite right there with not necessarily combining Finland and spacefaring together. And then it's not maybe the first thought in people's minds, but actually Finland has a long history, and the research community has been very active in the space arena for a very long time, already since the 1960s or so, and especially after 1995, when Finland joined the European Union and the European Space Agency. Both the research community and the private companies have been contracted to do projects within that sphere. So it's not completely something new for us, but what is new is maybe the upstream activities. So we are really, let's say, a new space country currently with the 7 satellites in orbit and in our national space registry that was done a few years back, which is, by the way, available online. So if you want to check on our ministry's website. So this is something novel that hasn't been there before, but this is, let's say, the current profile. But we haven't forgotten those other activities as well. So obviously, bilateral collaboration or the collaboration through ESA and the EU space programs is still something that our entities are very much doing currently. So, but it's a combination of this, say, let's say, more traditional approach and then the new space and private entities and spin-offs from the scientific institutions. And scientific institution was actually the first satellite mission that was launched from Finland in 2017. So very new things and by new actors and new uses of technology is maybe the profile that we currently have.
That's cool. That sounds great. And I mean, I had the pleasure to talk and to meet Jan Prax. I think he's the father of many of the satellite development in Finland a few times, and it's really exciting to see and to see also the speed. But tell me, and now bridging to the space law, how was the private sector encouraged to start in your country in the space sector? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, I mean, sort of like going back what you already said before about Nokia and sort of like the ICT heritage that we have and the good education system, that's of course something that's already behind there and incentivizing and making these good innovations possible. But so what is, from the space lawyer's point of view, something interesting that we've done is that we have a space law. I think we were the 11th out of the ESA member states that enacted that in 2018 in January, and this was something that was exactly prompted by these novel activities that we heard about, and the government at that point thought that taking into account the international framework that Finland was already party to at that time, so the international space law treaties, that sort of like required the law to be set up, not only because it's not actually mandated by the international space treaties to do so, but in Finland, our constitution requires that if you put restrictions on business activities, that you actually have to have something prescribed by law to allow for a licensing process to be set up. So for that reason, a combination of these two led into us having a national space law 2 years back. Okay. And at that same time, the Finnish space strategy was renewed, which meant as well then that more funding and so like networks started to be provided to those small startups who might not be so familiar with the space community already at the outset. So,
but you just said you implemented the law 2018, and but Aalto 1 was then in orbit 2017.
Yes, you're correct.
So
yeah, and well,
I told you I will listen to what you're saying. So.
That's very good, and actually that's so. The plans prompted the lawmaking process, but it's not easy to make a law. I mean, even if that's maybe the bread and butter by the government officers to make laws, and those are made on daily basis even. But making a space law is actually maybe a bit more complex activity. But I think we succeeded quite well in 1 year from the establishment of the working group to actually promulgation of the law and signature by the president in 2018 in January. But obviously there were missions already ongoing. So the law foresee kind of a period during which time those missions needed to be licensed when the law came into force. So during that sort of like preliminary period, there was more like an informal review of those missions and a dialogue with the operators on sort of like what is foreseen in the law going forward. But also many of the people, so many of the operators, people actually did take part into the making of the law. So we had very diverse group of people in the drafting process. So we were able to already hear some of the concerns even and challenges and so like the technical issues that lawyers might not have been aware of. So during the drafting process, which I think was actually a very good basis for the law to be enforced, because then we were able to anticipate some of the issues already, because it's really important that the law takes into account so like the interest and the activities that you have in your country. So that therefore, when you look at the national space laws from different countries, they are not the same, because that's so like they stem from the needs, what you currently have as well, and also what sort of a framework you have otherwise in place in your country. So even if they are based on the same international system, maybe interpretations on based on your own state, but nevertheless they are different based on the activity. So we do mostly small satellite operations currently. So this is something that we look more carefully into. But for example, launching is already foreseen that at least currently we don't have such activities, and therefore our law doesn't prescribe for those provisions.
Just asking about one of the sentence you just stated. You said we are taking this international input into our national law. So you're referencing to the Outer Space Treaty. Is that correct?
Yes. So.
Okay.
Well, I mean, at the time when we started to make the national space law, Finland was party to 3 of the, let's say, out of the 5 UN space treaties, which make up the international framework for space activities. So we were already parties to the Outer Space Treaty, to the Liability Convention, and to the Rescue and Return Agreement. And then at the same time, when we made the national space law, then Finland also acceded to the Registration Convention. So for us, that sort of makes the core principles of international space law that we apply and implement in our national space law. But of course, it's a framework of principles. So those are subject to interpretation, and some of them are still in discussion. And this is what we also refer to in our explanatory note of the law, that some of the issues and some of the definitions are still under discussion. And therefore, we haven't, for example, prescribed the limit of, so where does space begin? So we don't, for example, have such a provision in the national law, but rather refer to international discussion and wait for that discussion to develop and then also to apply to our activities.
I haven't heard that you signed or ratified the Moon Agreement. I think that answers then also Angelique's question about the new era of lunar exploration. But we can take that a little bit later, because I would like to know, how do you implement the national regulation? Because from a German point of view, and I see my good friend Ingo Baumann in the audience as well, so there are countries that are not that advanced in developing their space laws. So, and I mean, I would like to ask you later on for your recommendation, what you can give. But talking about your process, I mean, you said you got all the stakeholders are on the table, they gave their input. So how did you move forward from there? So in terms of, I mean, 1 year for law, honestly, for me, that sounds light speed. That's super fast.
Yeah.
But how could it work?
That's very true. I mean, also very happy that actually was a success, because we, as I mentioned, that we already knew that activities were planned And we wanted to create that sort of like predictable and clear framework for those activities for all the operators as well to know, and as well in a way to get funding for their missions, because for investment purposes even this is very important that operators will know whether they will get a license or not, or at least the requirements are so clear that it's very easy for them to evaluate this. So yes, 1 year was a very short time.
Okay.
But luckily there was already many colleagues from other European countries that we referred to. And so just to specify, I wasn't working with the government at that moment. So when I'm saying we, this is a very broad notion of we here. So referred to the colleagues, asked for their experiences. And I think this is really important as well going forward, that we do exchange amongst the governments as well, amongst within our states with our operators, but as well as a broader community about the experiences of the implementation. So we were able to already benefit from that experience. Let's say Denmark and Austria, for example, having very similar activities than what was planned for us. We were able to ask, how does it work for you when you've been implementing the law? So we had that, and as well there were a lot of projects that had been done on drafting national space law. So we could refer to, for example, the International Law Association's Sofia model law that already set certain issues that you should at least consider when making national space law. And as well, the colleagues from the ESA legal department, we were able to refer to their experiences also as a technical experts in the field. So I think the combination of having this broad community already taking part into the drafting made it a bit quicker. Of course, there were also then more opinions coming in, which were able to be taken into account. But as well, then we have quite effective and good system within Finland. I think in a small country, things are sometimes just easier, because you know the people, you can talk to colleagues quite informally as well. So I think that's one of the keys, even though I have to just say that, which is one peculiarity for us, because we are a bilingual country. So Finnish and Swedish are both our official languages. So whenever drafting law, you have to make the laws in both of the languages. And obviously for Finnish, we didn't have words for all space activities in Finnish, because obviously the law, you cannot refer to English definitions, but you have to craft the definitions even in your own language. So this took a bit of time. We were thinking like how to describe launch, for example. Is it sending off or launching? What sort of a word to use? So this was even a linguistic exercise that we did.
I think we shouldn't go into the definition of even terms we use today in our language in the space environment, space object. I think that will take us away from the road we like to stay on. But you refer to operators. So Aalto 1 as your first satellite who was in space already. So I thought it is a government operated flight, or is the university a private operator for you in your definition? How does that work?
Well, they are considered, let's say, non-governmental entity. So, and that's basically for what the national law was made for, non-governmental activities. So what comes as a requirement from the international framework is to license and supervise those non-governmental activities. So states are basically responsible for their own activities as well as the non-governmental activities, and then there is that liability consideration attached as a launching state linked to that, and that's one of the, let's say, from the government side, one of the main motivations to enact as well national space law, where you can then more clearly prescribe the relationship between the state, the national state, and the national operator on the national basis.
Cool. Before going into the specifics of your space law, I would like to encourage our wonderful audience to send in your questions. Otherwise, you will keep on going, hearing us talking. I mean, we have a number of questions prepared, so but as we like to exchange some ideas and some questions with you, feel free to send them in the Q&A box. But Jenni, back to you. So can you talk about the specifics in your space law when it comes to third-party liabilities, sustainability, licensing? How does it work?
Right. I mean, not to bore everyone with a lot of legalese, but I think
that's why they joined. You know, that's why they joined.
That's so the framework is pretty much very similar to any of the European space laws, if you look at it. So we have the basic provisions on who does it apply to. So for in our case, it applies to Finnish citizens. Also Finnish citizens residing abroad. So there is a bit of a broader perspective there, with the caveat already saying that if you work for the European Space Agency, for example, as a Finnish citizen, of course, this is not something that the law will apply to. Then it applies to activities that are carried out on the territory of Finland, and as well from vessels registered in Finland. So this is sort of like the scope of application. Where does it, in which kind of activities it applies to? But actually, then to what kind of activity? So then you have the entire notion of what are space activities. So this is something that sometimes makes it more difficult, and law here is maybe more limited in comparison to what people usually would think about as space activities. So it really applies to upstream activities, so activities that are going towards space and in space, but issues relating to the broader data economy are not within that scope. So it's really for the operation of satellites and for the purpose of launching them in space. So for example, for us, it is required, space activities license is required for the purposes of procuring a launch. So as I mentioned to you before, we don't have launch capabilities within our territory. So the launches are carried out elsewhere. But for our purposes, the operators will require already a license when procuring that launch from abroad. So that's already sort of like starts to be a bit of terrestrial activities prior to going to space, but those are already within the sphere of our space law. So for those activities, you need to get a license. Then it
because you're a launching state in any case. Then
yes. So for us, we consider it in such a way that also for private activities, missions that are launched from abroad, Finland considers itself as a launching state, as a broader notion, yes.
With implementing the space law in Finland, so how did it inspire your economy, or did it inspire your economy at all, or your ecosystem, or your already good education? And
well, I would like to think at least that it did, because missions have been planned after the law came into force, and there are currently all the time a lot of plans that are publicly announced. So I would think that having the law in place, even if, let's say that it's a bit of sometimes a misnomer that you put in a regulation that puts more rules on companies, that it could actually also to promote the activities. But like I mentioned to you before, it was about, we think that having those clear licensing requirements in the law and implementing them through that. So for example, when we ask for technical and financial reliability from the companies, we then really take an effort to explain what do we mean by that more general notion at the implementing phase. So it's something that the law will actually become live when used it, when we use it, or so like the principles become more practice. But also, I mean, since in a few years, there's quite many universities that have become even more active, not just Aalto University, but also University of Helsinki. And there's a Center of Excellence for Space Sustainability Research that is very active university framework in Finland with an ERC grant, which is also very good in terms of the fact that sustainability and space debris mitigation is actually something that is already mentioned in our national space law, and something that you could see as environmentally progressive requirement. It's not, so let's say that it's in development, how it will turn out to be at the end, because now we currently just deal with space debris mitigation. But nevertheless, I think it's good sign that already that requirement maybe on its own just already prompts research in that field.
We have a few more minutes for our questions. So even so, you didn't answer it explicitly, but what is Finland doing in terms of lunar exploration? Is it on your radar, or part of the law, or it's just when it happens, it happens?
Well, like yes.
I'm not asking if you're signing Artemis, so I'm not.
So we are not parties to the Moon Agreement currently, and also I think the focus is more on the current type of activities. So exactly on promoting the possibilities for small satellite missions, or satellite missions in general, and for the purposes of Earth observation, navigation, for example, which is an important topic for the Arctic area also. So I think we are looking currently more into near space with the activities.
Cool. There are two questions which are, I think, going in the same direction from Ingo and from Patricia. So, and I'm just reading out Patricia's question. There are many EU countries now going for space activities. How does Finland place itself amongst the EU competitors? For instance, Norway is reviewing its space law. Luxembourg puts on the focus on space mining activities. The UK goes for launching spaceports, and Portugal has a new space authority and agency also covering launch activities. And Ingo puts us one step further by the process it takes for applying for licenses, the fee, the lower liability caps, and so on and so forth. So, and he mentioned it in his questions, the flag of convenience. So, please.
Yeah, just if I can take that last word there with sure. The flags of convenience. This is, of course, an issue, I mean, for everyone to consider, together with, since we have some similarities, but still there are differences in national space laws. And since we all know that currently the treaty making is in standstill, but rather more soft regulation is done at the international level, then which requires for that to be effective implementation at national level. And of course, I think it's in everyone's interest to try to aim for some sort of coherence or similarities within the bigger picture, taking into account the different interests and activities within states, but really to prevent this sort of fragmentation or flags of convenience issues. But of course, I think this, I mean, it's a valid question even, you know, how to avoid that. But for me, the most important thing is that we keep on exchanging with one another, and at multilateral level, but also at that bilateral level, and amongst states, but also amongst the entire community, so that the industry actually also has a say in that discussion.
And I will take one last question, and all the others I will send over to you, and asking for a written answer. So another question from Patricia. In case you have Finnish citizen in charge of space launching activities abroad, Finland, what is the case? Will Finland register the space object, or will it be registered by the country where the launch is done? I think a very specific one, but it clarifies, I think, the logic in your law.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and there is a lot of consideration that has to be done. I mean, not a straightforward answer, I'm afraid, but nevertheless, I also there, because in not even in that case, but there are many cases where it's possible that it's many launching states, many countries who should be looking into the activity and looking into also in terms of the registration, who is in the best position to register that activity. And for that reason, there needs to be more dialogue amongst those states that could be in such a position. But that's the question on sort of like extraterritoriality of the Finnish space activities is of course a very relevant and a good one, but with, let's say, not a definite answer to that.
I sense that Portugal might be interested to have a chat about that, but
I would be very happy to do that.
let's leave that for a moment. I mean, I think we couldn't cover the dialogue or situation that with legal subcommittee didn't happen in Vienna this year. Copious are it's, as you said, in a standstill. But the good thing is, next week I have Niklas Hedman here in the talk, and I will exactly this question. So I'm afraid we have to come to an end here, Jenni. So these 33 minutes are going fast. And it was really a pleasure to talk to you about this topic, and be sure we will follow up on space law topics in our future Space Café web talks and our magazine as we do it. So upcoming events. Our next week, we have on the 21st, Niklas Hedman, my guest, are on the topic of the new frontier in space multilateralism. On 28th, I have a talk with Salem Al-Mari, the director or the assistant director general for the MBRSC in Dubai, about the diversity of the UAE space program, and hopefully after a successful launch of the Emirates Mars mission. So we know it's delayed due to weather conditions to the 16th right now, in our evening. So, but good luck to our friends in the UAE for this fantastic mission. And as a first-hand announcement, on the 4th of August, it's my pleasure to talk with Chris Johnson from the Secure World Foundation about lunar activities or lunar exploration. How big is the tent? About stakeholder dialogues, inclusion, and more. All events are online on Eventbrite already. And as always, we like to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, send us a pigeon or whatever. So don't forget to sign up for our daily and bi-weekly newsletters. Thank you all very much for your interest today in this very specific topic. Thank you, Jenni, for your exciting talk and being my guest. And thanks again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing that great job week by week. Again, I hope you all will stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks for joining us. I hope to see you next week. And in the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. Bye-bye for now.